Today I will be giving all the Sinnoh Legendaries a paradox form. I've tried my best to make each and every one of them as unique as possible, and I can already tell you that the design for Giratina is crazy. Our first stop for today is for Azelf. We quickly decided to make the Lake Trio into past forms because going for future forms for these would be too basic. As I mentioned in a different video, there are 3 different types of paradox forms. I wanted to give this trio the Screaming Tail treatment. This meant that we weren't going to make these into entirely different creatures, but just make them look like a feral version of themselves. In order to get that look, we started out by making his head a lot spikier. I did this to emulate feathers. Next up we had to implement the makeup which all past forms have, and we gave him some small teeth. I was debating to give him an underbite, but that looked too forced, so we went with vampire ones. After this dentist appointment, we added some feather-like spikes on the bottom of his arms and made his hands a lot thicker as well. We also tried to add another tail to the mix, but that just added visual clutter, so there was no point in doing so. We did however change the design of his tails by giving him the blue feathers and adding some depth into them too. The last things we did was to make his gems look a lot less polished, and we added some blue markings to the beginning of his tails. For the colors I went with a slightly more saturated version of the ones used on the original art piece. I think brighter colors should be used for a lot of past forms, since I like to see them as connected with nature, and I feel like bright colors represent that connection better. Apathetic Tear, the paradox Pokemon. If we compare with the Lake Trio of our current times, these 3 appear to represent 2 complete opposite traits. We also found out that this trio isn't guarding lakes, but is actually focused on rivers instead. We'll now discuss each of them separately. Apathetic Tear appears to have nothing to do with willpower, and it shows no interest into whatsoever. Even though it isn't interested in anything, it is actually capable of protecting his river, simply by just hanging in and around it. Like I said, I didn't want to do something completely different for this one, but I still think the design just simply works. If every paradox Pokemon would change as much as Walking Wake, that design wouldn't be as powerful anymore. The second transformation is for Uxie. This piece was a lot easier than the first one of the trio. Not because the first one was that hard, but because we now had some design conventions we could follow for this one as well. I wanted to make sure that they would still instantly look related to each other, but I didn't want to copy the exact same changes over and over again. My way of treating this problem was to change the same aspects of the Pokemon, but in a different way. We also brought Uxie to the barber for a new haircut, but instead of making them into feathers, we kept his hair as long wavy spikes. This style was now applicable to the other features, like the ends of his tail, the bottom of his arms, and even to the makeup under his eyes. This already made up for a unique design, and we then just had to add the teeth and fix the rocks to finish up the design entirely. Ignorant Jolt, the paradox Pokemon. When we first encountered this Pokemon, we thought we would be getting a ton of forgotten knowledge from the ancient world, since regular Uxie is the Pokemon of knowledge. Technically we weren't wrong, because the only information we got out of this creature was so easy to understand that it would be almost impossible to forget. Even though our expectations weren't met, this Pokemon was actually very chill and kind to us. We figured that this exact energy makes him able to protect his river while simply being too kind to want to harm it. I could really see this Pokemon as one of the best companions to have. It just doesn't judge you and makes sure you have a good time. Sounds like a pretty good friend to me. It is now time for the final Lake Guardian, Mesprit. Since all of these 3 Pokemon are mono psychic type, I was only able to add 1 additional typing to them. This meant that they would all still be a psychic type, but in order to make them all seem different, I tried to use those type design conventions into my sketches. A lot of people suggested to make this one into a part fire type, because that would have worked as the original evolution triangle. Now I knew that could have looked cool, but the flamey shapes would have looked too similar to the shapes we used on Ace Elf. I decided to make this one into a Fairy Psychic type because that left a lot of room to make his features stand out to the others. Fairy types are mostly friendly and bubbly shaped creatures, so the theme for this one would be bubbly waves. You might think it looks a bit too much like a poison type with all of these wiggles, but that completely changes when you add in the colors. The bright pink and the pose really give it a fairy aesthetic. The added red color for all of them really add to the feral look, especially since we didn't only give that color to their gems, but to their makeup as well. Logical Mind, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon appears to make well thought out decisions, making sure that everything he does has a purely functional reason, unlike the regular form of Mesprit, which acts mostly out of its emotions. This makes it that this past form isn't always seen as nice, because it appears to lack compassion. Even though this might not be the best strategy to keep friends, it is very effective at protecting his river by simply only being focused on that task. I feel like this design finishes up this trio perfectly. They all look feral, but still keep the same essence of the Pokemon. I love it. Well, it's finally time to move away from the Lake Guardians into a future form of Cresselia. I've decided on a future form for this one because I've already seen an incredible past form for this Pokemon on Instagram. I won't show it in the video because I don't know if the creator wants that, but he's called Albert Wilson on Instagram, so if you're curious, go check him out on there after this video. The transformation for this piece was pretty straightforward. We began by segmenting his neck, which instantly adds to the robotic aesthetic. We then did the same thing for his tail, and we added a bunch of suggested segment lines on the rest of his body. These combined with a small highlight in the end always adds a ton to the future designs. The last thing we did was to make the rings separated from the body, and we gave them small metallic holders at the tip of them. I went with a slightly darker color palette in order to play into the part dark typing. I did this because I want to play into Darkrai being a dark psychic type once we get to the mythicals. Iron Blessing, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon appears to be corrupted by another creature. While it used to give out joyful dreams to those who slept while holding its feather, its purpose now seems to make anyone sad in its surroundings. I tried my best to make this design interesting by detaching the rings from its body. I wouldn't really know what else to do with the design, so I must say I'm happy with the end result. Up next is the past form of Heatran. I actually enjoyed the making of this piece quite a lot. Instead of making this piece look like a completely different creature, I wanted to make him look more volcanic. We started out by giving into this idea by changing all of his stones to actual looking rocks. You can find this change in Walking Wake's design as well. After we were done with those changes, we thought it would be a good idea to lengthen his tail and to make his teeth a lot sharper and defined. It was at this point we came up with the concept of replacing his tongue with burning lava. This really was the change that actually placed this Pokemon into volcanic areas. The color stayed very similar, but I did make sure to add a slight touch of grey in there too. I still think we aren't allowed to change a Paradox Pokemon's color palette drastically, but I still want him to look more volcanic. Luckily, we were easily able to fix that with its shiny. Heated Toad, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon is said to be the result of a lot of volcanic activity exposed to rainstorms. It appears that these conditions molded this hardened ball of lava into shape. It can heat up the ground by simply sticking its arms into it, burning everything around it. I must say that I definitely prefer the shiny colors over the regular one, because it simply fits the volcanic theme more. But on the other hand, this would really give people incentive to shiny hunt this beast. Hey friends, I quickly want to thank everyone for all the support I've gotten in the past months. We've grown at an incredible pace, but I am looking to speed it up even more. Last month I had 188,000 unique viewers, but only less than 8% of you were actually subscribed. I get it, subscribing is annoying, so let me pay it back to you. If we hit 15,000 subscribers, Before the end of August, I will do a face reveal, and even better, I will also release my tutorial on how to draw Paradox Pokemon for beginners, plus my own custom brush set. Well, thank you for subscribing. Our next drawing is for Regigigas. I quickly want to tell you that this is the first time in a long time I actually made these upcoming 4 pieces off stream. I did this because my neck was hurting for a majority of the week, so streaming wasn't the best decision for my health. No one has seen these pieces before, so definitely let me know what you think of them in the comments. When I first saw the design of Regigigas again, I instantly saw his typing. He usually is a normal type, but we decided to add an extra typing which wasn't used on the other Regis yet, just like we did for the Hoenn Legendaries. Now I'm guessing you already know which typing it's going to be, but it's a normal grass type. This would work perfectly with all the grass he has on his body. Next up, I wanted to make his arms a bit more interesting. My idea for that was to make them bigger and replace his fingers for an energy cannon. We then made sure to add the screen to his sort of face, but I wasn't really sure if we didn't have to make those colored circles as the eyes. I think they aren't, because that's not how the other Regis worked, but it did give me something else I wanted to add. I read them as the colors of the Hoenn Regis, which meant that 2 of those colors were missing for the Regis out of Galar. I fixed this by adding bigger versions of those circles onto the side of his arms. Iron Balance, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon is suspected to be the leader of all the other Regis. We have found documents about a futuristic war between these robots, but the story ends with the line, "But then came a bigger version of them and they stopped fighting." We aren't 100% certain, but every time one of the other Regis move, the orbs on Iron Balance's body glow brightly. I really like the idea of this Pokemon being the Rayquaza for all the Regis, keeping them in check. Oh yeah, I did write most of the lore of all of these Pokemon myself as well, where usually I get a lot of help from my community. I hope you guys like it. We've now reached the point of the box Legendaries again. It is time for a future form of Dialga. We went for future because they of course already have an origin form. This does conflict with the rule of making the box Legendaries opposite forms, so we decided on a past form of Giratina because, you know, paradox forms don't always make sense. We started out this piece by segmenting his neck and adding a bunch more lines to emulate segments as well. We then detached the spikes he has on his back, and we even removed the connecting parts in between them. Since we did it at that part of his body, I felt like we had to do the same thing for the metal he has on his face. We then noticed he had some spikes on the side of his neck, so I removed them and placed them on the other side. Of course not attached either. The last thing I tried was to detach his toes, but that looked hideous. The colors were basically the same except for the lighted area. I made sure to make those a bit brighter in order to make him a part ice type. I know a lot of you might argue that it doesn't look robotic enough, but I hope I'll change your mind with the shiny for this piece. Iron Diamond, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon was created in order to assist Dialga in the control of time, but once it discovered it was stronger than its leader, it took over after eventually beating Dialga in a battle of life and death. It has now arrived in the present times, trying to replace Dialga from the entire timeline. I know we probably wouldn't know what and how this Pokemon happened, but I just wanted to bring in an endgame level threat to Paldea, where I would see the trainers combining forces with the real Dialga to stop this creature. I wouldn't have been able to land this lore without explaining the future. I now left some space in the video for its counterpart, Palkia. This design was a lot easier to pull off than the one for Dialga. I just followed the same design conventions again, and we started out by detaching his metallic parts just like we did for his brother. We then implemented a lot of segments, mainly on his tail and neck. This piece didn't need a lot of extra segment lines because it already looked quite robotic. We then added some lines to his belly and under his arm, followed up by the colors. Just like always, light body colors make it a lot harder to add the oomph to the piece. This is because I usually add a lot of highlights which are barely visible on a light color. We did also make sure to use a brighter version of the regular color for his lighted parts. This helped to bring in his other typing, the psychic typing. Iron Pearl, The Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon was created to aid Palkia and Dialga in a battle against Iron Diamond. Even with their forces combined, they weren't strong enough to stop him. It appears that his control over time was on such a high level that his attacks came in before they were even thrown. Luckily, Palkia and Iron Pearl have survived this battle and have appeared just in time for a stand against this ungodly beast. You might be wondering why this Pokemon isn't a primary dragon type, but that just worked best for the overlay, to make a good distinction between the Dark Dialga and the Light Palkia. Well, enough of that crazy lore. I may have let myself go a bit there. Let's talk about Giratina. I must say that I wasn't immediately sure what to do with this piece. I wanted to change the species, but I didn't want to overdo it either. This is how I came up with the Centipede look. That would be equally scary as it would be different. We started out by adding a bit more flesh around the spikes on his neck, and we made sure to make his horns look a bit more evil too. I then changed the armor he has on his knees to make them look a bit more natural instead of metallic. We then got to a point where I just didn't know what to do with this creature. We tried giving him a scorpion tail, looks awful. Tried giving him fur on his back, looked way too forced. I just had to take a step back, and I went to bed and tried again in the morning. It was at that point where I saw an opportunity, which would make this design look a lot more unique, but it was definitely risky. I transformed his entire neck into one huge mouth. The design looked a bit too flat in this way, so we brought in some demonic looking wings and added back in the tail. The colors weren't that different, they just had a little difference in placement. I did debate on which color to fill the mouth with, because spoiler alert, this Pokemon would be the gateway to hell. Hellish Gate, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon is known to better be avoided. Rumors say that it lures you in with amazing deals, but once you give in to these desires, you grant him the right to eat you. This centipede looking Pokemon is said to be the direct gateway to hell, and it appears that a lot of Pokemon are mysteriously disappearing in Area Zero. I am not sure about this design. I think the concept is amazing, but the execution isn't perfect. I really think that you will either love or hate the design, no in between. Well everyone, this was Sinnoh. Next week we'll have the compilation of our first 4 generations, and a week after we'll take care of Unova. Let me know which design was your favorite, and goodbye.